Vienna, 1896, as sleet rattled against the gaslit windows of the Hofburg Palace's Imperial Library. Gavriel Ellison had never meant to speak to the Crown Princess. He was a scholar, brought from Boston by the Imperial Academy to translate a cache of 16th-century Ottoman diplomatic letters. For 2 months, he'd lived in the palace's east wing, cloaked in silence, ink-stained fingers and woolen cuffs, too low-born to be spoken to and too foreign to be trusted. But early that morning, the Archduke's son had flung open the library doors, demanding a duel at dawn with a Hungarian captain, and left behind a single leather-bound volume in his fury. When Gavriel stooped to return it, she was there. Princess Philomena Petra Paxton stood by the hearth, one gloved hand resting on a globe of the Habsburg holdings, her eyes the same pale gray as the storm outside. She was not supposed to be in the library. She was never alone. "You're the American," she said without turning. He froze with the book clutched to his chest. "Yes, Your Imperial Highness. I read your footnotes in the Suleiman letters. You write as if you've lived through them." He didn't answer. He couldn't find his voice. She turned then, her gaze sharp and curious. "Do you believe anyone can love across a war?" He swallowed. "I think it would take more than love." That made her smile faintly. "Good." And just like that, she reached for the book in his hands, her glove brushing his skin, and left. Gavriel didn't sleep that night. The next time they met, it was raining. He was returning translations to the archivist when a servant slipped a folded linen handkerchief into his palm, marked only with a single stitched P. "Third corridor." After Vespers. He nearly didn't go. But he did. She was waiting in a shallow alcove behind a tapestry, already soaked from the drafty halls. "You're bolder than I expected," she said. "You sent for me." "I did. I want you to teach me Ottoman Turkish." Gavriel blinked. "Surely one of your tutors." "They've been dismissed. My father fears I'm too curious." He hesitated. "This isn't safe. If they find out." "They won't. You'll be my secret tutor." She reached for his hand, pressed a folded page into it. The first line read, "To understand the enemy is to understand peace." Something in him broke open. By the week's end, they'd met 5 times. Always in different corners of the palace, under the staircase by the music room, in the old servants' passage near the kitchens, once behind the chapel organ during Mass. He read to her in hushed syllables, her accent soft and slow. She asked questions, clever ones, complicated ones, and when she laughed, it was quiet but real. He never touched her again. Not even when her scarf slipped from her shoulders and he could have brushed it back. Not even when she once fell asleep beside him, cheek on his notes, and he had to sit motionless for an hour, heart pounding like a drum. But others were watching. Late one evening, after he had returned to his chamber, a knock came. A boy, Wenzel, the stablemaster's son, slipped inside and barred the door. "They know," he whispered. "The Archduke's valet saw you near the princess's rooms. You have until dawn." Gavriel's blood turned to ice. "She'll be punished. She's already being locked in the West Tower." "Go." "No." Wenzel stared at him. "You'll die. I have to see her." He ran through corridors slick with melted snow, ducking guards, heart hammering. At the tower's base, he found the guard post empty, bribed, he guessed. Wenzel again. Loyal, brave. He climbed the narrow spiral stairs 2 at a time. Philomena was at the window, her gown a pale blue blur in the moonlight. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "I had to." Her eyes glistened. "They'll exile you. I'm nobody. They'll forget me." "Not me." He stepped closer. In the silence between them, the air shifted. She reached up and cupped his cheek, bare hand against his skin. "I'm tired of pretending," she said. He leaned in, forehead against hers. "So am I." She kissed him first. It was brief but fierce, like something stolen from a better world. Then came steps on the stairs. She shoved him toward the back wall. There's a servant's hatch behind the tapestry. Go. I won't leave you. You must. Reluctantly, he obeyed. The hatch led to a narrow shaft, barely wide enough to crawl. He heard voices behind him, her father's, cold and furious. 3 days later, he was gone from Vienna. The official story was misconduct. Unfit character. The academy did not protest. But he carried with him a single letter, slipped into his coat by Wenzel the night of his flight. It read only, "If they bind me in gold, I will still find you." Wait. He did. For 8 long months, he waited in Prague, working as a clerk for a bookseller, sleeping in a garret above the shop. Then, one hot September afternoon, she walked through the door. No guards. No ladies in waiting. No veil. Just her, in a traveling coat and boots, hair braided beneath her hat. "I refused the engagement," she said. "My cousin will marry the Bavarian prince. I chose exile." He stared at her, unable to breathe. "I'm not a princess anymore," she said. "But I'm free." He crossed the room in 2 steps and kissed her like he'd never stopped. They married in a tiny Lutheran chapel 2 blocks from the river. No trumpets. No court. Only them. From forbidden to forever. Prague, 1897, beneath an overcast sky that pressed low over the city's tiled rooftops. The bells of St. Nicholas told the hour as Philomena arranged the last of the crockery in the narrow cupboard. The scent of boiled barley lingered in the corners of the room, and the chipped windowpanes rattled faintly in their frames. Gavriel had written into the evening, hunched over a manuscript at the far table, his brow furrowed beneath his dark hair now longer than court fashion had ever allowed. She turned, drying her hands on her apron. "You didn't eat." "I will. I'm nearly through the final section." He didn't look up. "You've said that for 3 days." He paused, quill poised above the page. The archive sent a new folio. Letters from an Armenian envoy to the Sultan's court. They change everything. She crossed the room, pressed a hand to his shoulder. "Sleep changes more." He took her fingers in his, turned them over gently. "You still wear your signet." "It was my mother's before it was mine." Her voice had softened. "Sometimes I forget it's no longer a symbol of anything but memory." He brushed his thumb along the edge of the ring. "I forget you were meant for silks and salons. You remember too often." Gavriel closed the notebook carefully and set it aside. "There's a position at Charles University. Junior lecturer, Eastern languages. They've written to me." Her breath caught. "In Prague?" "For now. But there's mention of Vienna. In time." She sat beside him, their knees touching. "Would you go back?" "I would if you were with me. I won't set foot in that palace again." He nodded. "Then we stay." Philomena leaned her head against his shoulder, the fabric of his coat still smelling faintly of library dust and ink. "I never imagined I would feel at home in a place with no marble, no liveried staff. But I do. Because no one watches you here. Because you do. And you see me." Outside, a cart rolled past, iron wheels clattering over cobblestones. Somewhere nearby, a child sang to herself as she skipped rope. He shifted, reaching into the satchel beneath the table. "I've been working on this for months. I wanted to wait until I had the university's offer, but..." He laid a small wooden box in her lap, the clasp worn smooth. She opened it slowly. Inside, nestled on a square of linen, lay a pendant, a simple gold disc etched with a crescent and star, the same emblem from the Ottoman seal she had studied so many months ago, but smaller, more delicate. Her eyes widened, but she said nothing. "It's not royal," Gavriel said. "But it's ours. You translated the first letter." I translated the last. We finished it together. She closed the lid and rested her hand over it. Then I'll wear it always. That night, long after the lamps had been extinguished, she sat at the edge of the bed, watching the rain trace silver lines down the glass. I've been thinking, she whispered. He stirred beneath the blanket. About? There's a school on Vinohrady Street. Girls only. Czech and German languages. They need someone to teach history. He blinked awake. You want to teach? I want to use what I know. It's not treason to speak of the past. He reached for her hand. They'll ask questions. I'll answer them. I'm no longer ashamed of my name. In the weeks that followed, they fell into a rhythm neither had known before. Mornings began with the smell of black bread and soft butter. Gavriel lectured twice weekly, his students lean-faced and eager, their notebooks filled with careful script. Philomena walked to the schoolhouse in a dark wool cloak, nodding to the grocer's wife as she passed. Letters from Vienna came once in a while, stiff, impersonal notices from the Ministry of Titles. She burned them without reading past the seal. One afternoon, as spring crept in with pale crocuses blooming along the Vltava, they sat in the public garden near the Rudolfinum, sharing a paper parcel of roasted chestnuts. A boy played the violin poorly on the corner, and an old woman sold lavender sachets from a basket lined with lace. Philomena tucked a stray curl behind her ear. Do you ever wonder what they say about us? No, Gavriel said. But I hope it's unrepeatable. She laughed, low and sudden. You never liked their rules. I liked you. The rules were in the way. She leaned in, her lips brushing his cheek. You still surprise me. He turned to face her fully. Then let me ask you something. Her eyes met his. Would you marry me again? Not because we had to. But because we choose to. She didn't answer at first. Then she stood and offered him her hand. They crossed the bridge as the sun broke through the clouds, its light gilding the water below. The first letter arrived in mid-November, carried by a courier with frost on his collar and the wary eyes of someone who'd crossed a border under false pretenses. Gavriel had just returned from a lecture on Persian poetics, his fingers still mottled with chalk, when the messenger pressed the envelope into his hand and vanished down the steps without waiting for acknowledgement. Philomena opened it beside the hearth, where the last coals of the morning fire cracked softly. Her posture stiffened as she read. Gavriel watched her eyes move across the page, slow at first, then with gathering weight. It's from Aunt Sabine, she said finally, folding the letter with deliberate care. She's dying. There's no physician left in the southern canton who knows how to treat her condition. He studied her profile, every line of it shaped by control, not serenity. She's asking you to come. She's asking me to send money. Philomena looked toward the window. And to consider reconciliation. She says the emperor has softened. That I could petition for restoration if I returned discreetly. Without you. Gavriel didn't move. You won't. No. She rested the letter on the table and reached for his sleeve. But I want to go. Not as a supplicant. As her niece. She raised me when my mother fell ill. I owe her that. He nodded slowly. Then I'll go with you. They'll be watching. Then we'll be cautious. They left 2 days later under assumed names, taking the northbound train to Linz before turning south by carriage through the forest roads that edged the imperial hunting preserves. She wore a linen blouse dyed the color of ash and a felt hat pulled low over her ears. Gavriel kept his coat collar turned up and carried only a single case filled with medical texts and a worn copy of the New Testament, in which he'd hidden their forged papers. The village of Altwald lay sunken in mist when they arrived. The innkeeper, a stooped man with a harelip, remembered Philomena instantly but asked no questions once she pressed a silver coin into his hand and murmured her aunt's name. Sabine's house stood beside the chapel, its shutters warped with age, the garden choked by ivy. Inside, The scent of vinegar and old rosewater clung to the walls. The chambermaid, an unsteady girl of 15, led them upstairs without speaking. Sabine lay propped against a mound of pillows, her skin yellowed beneath the eyes, her hair pulled back in a thin braid. She looked smaller than Philomena remembered, less formidable, less certain. "I wondered if you would come," she said, voice sanded down to its edges. "I came to see you, not them," Philomena replied, stepping to the bed. Sabine's gaze flicked to Gavriel. "And the American?" "I'm her husband." There was a pause. "You look like someone who's read too many books," Sabine muttered. "I have," Gavriel agreed gently. The old woman gave a wheezing sound that might have been approval. "Then perhaps you'll understand what kind of creature regret makes of the proud." Philomena sat down beside her and reached for her hand. They stayed 6 days. During daylight, Gavriel helped repair the garden gate and brought in firewood. At night, he read aloud from the Psalms when Sabine's fever worsened. Philomena prepared tinctures from dried roots she found in the cellar and spent long hours sitting silently beside the bed, her fingers busy with stitching she never finished. On the 5th evening, Sabine opened her eyes and whispered, "The Emperor's men will come after I die. They'll want the letters I kept. From your mother. From your tutors. They'll bury your history, child." Philomena leaned close. "Where are they?" "In the chapel crypt. Behind the 3rd niche, in a rusted tin." Gavriel found them just before dawn. The letters were brittle with damp, bound with a ribbon so faded it looked colorless. He didn't open them. He carried the tin back to the house and placed it in Philomena's lap as she stood at the window watching the sky lighten. "She wanted you to have them." Philomena ran her hand over the lid. "I thought I'd forgotten," her voice. "But I hear it again now." Sabine passed quietly the next night. No priest. No ceremony. They buried her in the orchard behind the house, beneath the one tree that hadn't gone bare. A few yellow apples still clung stubbornly to its branches. As they stood side by side in the frost-hardened earth, Philomena turned to Gavriel. "I don't want to disappear." "You won't." "I mean my name. My history. I want to write it down, Gavriel. Not for court approval. For the girls I teach. For us." He reached into his coat, withdrew his notebook, and handed it to her. "Then begin." She flipped to the first blank page. Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote, but her voice was steady as she read aloud the opening line. "I was born between two worlds, one of velvet, one of ink." He smiled, quiet and full. On the journey back to Prague, they traveled as themselves. No aliases. No fear. They returned not as fugitives, but as authors of their own lives. By late spring, the manuscript was finished. They'd spent the better part of 3 months in quiet labor, Philomena transcribing memories that had once only lived in the corners of her mind, Gavriel cross-referencing names and dates, gently shaping the prose without ever dulling her voice. The final chapter closed with the first morning they'd woken together in Prague, a city that had once been foreign and now pulsed with the rhythm of their shared life. Philomena stood at the window of their flat, watching a street hawker arrange bunches of lilac in a wooden crate. The scent drifted up faintly, mingling with the sharpness of ink and the faint smoke from the stove. "What do you think they'll say?" she asked. Gavriel looked up from his chair, spectacles still perched on the bridge of his nose. "Who?" "The readers. If we publish it." He marked his place with a ribbon. "Some will say you were reckless. Others will say you were brave." She turned to face him fully. "And you?" "I'll say you told the truth." "That's enough." A knock interrupted them. Slow, deliberate. Philomena moved first, brushing dust from her skirt. When she opened the door, a tall man in a slate coat stood on the threshold, his boots damp with morning dew. His mustache was waxed in the Viennese style, but his face bore the tiredness of long travel. "Frau Ellison?" he asked. Her spine straightened. Yes. I come with invitation, not summons. From His Imperial Majesty's personal secretary. Gavriel rose behind her, silent. The man extended a sealed parchment. There will be a gathering at Schönbrunn. An informal one. The Emperor wishes to review the changing policies on succession and nationality. He requests your presence. Both of you. Philomena's voice was steady. Is this a trap? The man shook his head. It is politics. And perhaps, penance. He left without accepting tea. That night, Gavriel lit the lamp early. The manuscript sat untouched on the table, wrapped in waxed cloth, ready for the printer. But neither of them reached for it. You're not obligated, he said. I know. No one can force you back into that world. She leaned forward. I'm not afraid of them. I'm afraid of what it will feel like to stand in those rooms and not belong to them anymore. He exhaled slowly. Then we go. Together. On our terms. They traveled by private carriage, not because of pride, but to control who saw them arrive. The old yellow palace still loomed against the sky, its facade unchanged, its windows still catching the light like mirrors. Philomena wore a dark green dress, modest in cut, the sleeves embroidered with check motifs she'd stitched herself. Gavriel wore his wedding ring openly for the first time in Vienna. They were led not to the central hall, but to a smaller salon overlooking the orangery. There, the Emperor's secretary waited, an aging man with a stiff collar and a gaze that flicked to Philomena's hands, then quickly away. You are not summoned, he said. This is a request. There are those within the court who believe your words matter. They want to include your voice in the review. Your experiences. Your view of what the empire has become. And what do you want? She asked. He hesitated. To avoid another war. Philomena lifted her chin. Then you'll need to stop pretending women don't remember everything. And that their memories don't matter. He didn't argue. As they returned to the city that night, Philomena sat with her fingers laced in Gavriel's. The road was quiet, the sky a deep violet beyond the lantern glow. I never imagined they'd ask for my voice, she said. They didn't, he replied. You claimed it. She smiled, but it was tired. I want to finish the book. But I also want to speak. To the girls. To the teachers. To the ones who still think they're made to be quiet. Then we'll print it. And we'll speak. One doesn't replace the other. In the months that followed, invitations came in quiet succession. Not from palaces, but from universities, reading circles, women's societies. Philomena read excerpts in salons where the air smelled of lamp oil and tobacco, where older men raised skeptical brows until she began to speak, and then, slowly, listened. Gavriel taught in the mornings and edited in the evenings. He never missed a single reading. One night, as they crossed the stone bridge near the theater, she paused, staring out over the river. I used to think love had to be thunder, she said. Loud, dramatic, impossible to miss. And now? Now I think it's the bridge itself. Quiet. Ordinary. But it holds everything. He pressed a kiss to her temple, nothing grand, but steady. That year, the first printing of their book sold out in 6 weeks. They called it, Memory is Not Treason. They didn't ask permission. And they didn't need to.